Go.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello,
Sydney.
people. Hi, Steph. Hi, people of Barbara's Bookstore. So enthusiastic to be here. So honored to be here in front of you. And especially with one of my favorite people alive, and certainly one of my favorite authors I've ever worked with, Stephanie Plymale. So I'm going to go ahead, Steph, and introduce you, and I'll introduce myself briefly, and then we'll get into these questions. I want to remind the people of Barbara's Bookstore, though, before we start, that you can use this little link at the bottom to go buy your copy of American Daughter. You get 10% off. And then also you can use the little ask a question feature in the bottom right-hand corner, and we'll be taking questions throughout this hour. So get busy with those questions. We're here for them. So I'm Sydney Rogers. I am an editor at Harper One, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. And I edit everything from memoir to health to narrative, nonfiction. And I'm here, we're all here because of the amazing Stephanie Plymale, whose book, American Daughter, we're going to talk about today. Stephanie is an author, of course, which is what we're all doing here, but she's also an incredibly accomplished designer. She's the CEO of a design school called Heritage, and we'll get into a little bit of that. And she's also newly a podcast host as well. Her podcast, Stephanie, jump in and correct me if I mess this up. It goes live in the spring, and it's called Overcoming. Amazing. Well, to kick things off for everyone, I asked Stephanie to read a passage from her book. And that's on page, in case anyone has the book and wants to follow along, that is on page 262. So take it away, Steph.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me and being such an amazing editor that I have enjoyed working with. One of the best experiences of my life. So I'm going to start with this passage in page 262, which is really sums up. It's a really powerful part of the book. I was the American dream, a rags to riches tale, a poster girl for social advancement, an unlikely achiever, and a bootstrapper. I was a feel-good story, a happy ending. I was a living proof that a child in this country can come from nothing and end up with everything, that dreams and drive and grit mean more than high birth or fancy pedigree. I was walking evidence of equal opportunity, a testament to the possibilities of transcendence. I was an American daughter in the most optimistic sense of the phrase, and I was an American nightmare. I was a child, one of millions who fell between the cracks. I was our failed school system, a girl who remained silent in the classroom, illiterate past the age of 8 without anyone taking notice. A kid who sat outside the school office for hours with a shattered arm and no pain relief because my mother was in no hurry to show up and it wasn't important enough to bother about. I was our failed child protective system, the girl who lived with her siblings on the beach for a year, alone, unschooled, and free of adult supervision, eating seaweed because we were starving, without causing any concern. The kid who went half blind from untreated strabismus, the child returned to an incompetent and criminally negligent parent over and over and over again. I was our failed foster care system placed in a home of a serial sexual predator, one of many children sent to them over God knows how many years. The sister of a boy raped in juvenile detention home. I was our failed legal system, the daughter of a girl child gang raped by upwards of a dozen grown men, none of whom were sentenced to more than 2 months in prison, the daughter of a woman driven mad by trauma and injustice. I was our failed healthcare system, the daughter of a woman who never once in her lifetime received adequate care for mental illness, the daughter of a woman who was committed to countless psychiatric wards, the conditions of which were worse than any horror movie. An American daughter. I descended from America's foremost founding family. In my bloodline, along with the Washingtons, are the likes of the Grubbs, the Thorntons, the Beals, suppliers of the Revolutionary War, titans of industry, men of education and intellect, men who were among the founders of Harvard, the New York Cotton Exchange, People so exclusive and insular that they disown their daughter for marrying outside a high society. My ancestors were the founders and builders of America, as socially prominent and blue-blooded as they came. But I also descended from a line of women who rejected it all, from a grandmother who eloped with her chauffeur, who gave away her family's priceless heirlooms in a yard sale, a mother who burned her house to the ground, who refused her membership into the rarefied social order of her girlhood, who turned her back on safety and respectability. I was an illegitimate child born out of wedlock. I'm the daughter of an Italian immigrant, a diaper salesman, the granddaughter of a cab driver, the adopted daughter of a Latino short order cook, the stepdaughter of a drunk and a junkie, an armed robber, a grifter, and an ex-convict, and a Peyote Way Church of God devotee. My brothers and sisters are Puerto Rican. My daughter is Guatemalan. My family is the war-torn and weathered, punctured, patched over, gilt-edged, and glimmering tapestry of America.
Wow.
That's
beautiful.
Powerful to open with that. You're the first person who's asked me to open with that part of the book because it's so close to the end.
How does it make you? So I wanted you to open with that book, with that section, because I have found since the book went on sale, a lot of people quoting and connecting with that section of the book. And it also, it functions as this way to kind of cover a lot of the things you get into in the story itself, in the memoir itself, but it outlines it in such a way where it says, I was an American nightmare. I was an American daughter. This really is a story of you and of kind of America, of roots and place and where you're from. So first, I just want to know how it feels to read that section. Talked about the book so much. Like, what are you feeling?
It's really surreal to me. And it's also so real to me. I mean, there's so much there. It's so hard to even unpack it because it's everything. I mean, I was the foster child. My mother was so mentally ill. I was all those things, but then through writing my book, I'm also descended from the founders of our country. And to see my family go so far from being the founders to where I ended up. I ended up homeless. I ended up in our system. I'm also very moved because I think of how many kids are in the system and how my siblings didn't make it out, and that I made it out. And I'm here to tell that story and to give strategies to help people to make it out. So it's really emotional. I have so much pride in knowing who my family is, and then I have this other story. So it's hard to put it all into words, but I've also realized that for me, America still is a place where dreams can happen because my story, I feel like if I was born into any other country, I wouldn't be the CEO. I wouldn't get to be sitting here with you. I wouldn't get to be an author and the things that I've been able to work for, and that I feel I've had opportunity to pull myself out of that and not end up that way.
Completely agree. In this section, and I like to kick things off talking about your mom, because she's of course a huge part of the book, but she's also one of the most challenging characters I've ever read in a memoir ever. Because she forces you, the way that you wrote the book, you're forced as a reader to kind of contend with what we first want your mom to be, and then what she actually is, and how we actually should view her. So you mentioned in that section that you read about her being criminally negligent, but of course about her past. So tell the people listening a little bit about your mom as a character, what she suffered from, and what kind of your childhood was like.
My mother was criminally selfish. I mean, she was so indifferent, and the way I write the book and the way I tell the story is who she is. From the first chapter of her trying to abort me, she just tells it just like I'm sitting here talking to you. There's no emotion. She was a sociopath. And she had these different personalities that she would go between 3 different personalities, but there was still my mom. There was still a person there that I loved. I loved my mom. And you know that. I longed for my mom, no matter who she was or what she was. And so, but she was also just incredibly mentally ill. But, when I found out what happened to her, that kind of changed everything. And when I went in to do these series of interviews, I wanted her to take responsibility for what she had not just done to me, but to the world. I felt that I felt that she was responsible at that time. When I first started, I didn't know what had happened to her. So I wanted her to take responsibility. I was like, before you die, you're going to take responsibility for what you did. But then once I found out, it was more about acceptance. And I hope that so many people who've read the book, who have estranged relationships, have said, I wish I would have done this with my mother before she died, or I'm going to do this. I'm going to set up these interviews and I'm going to do this. And I think that really inspires me, that you can have forgiveness and you can have healing, because my mother did the most atrocities. I felt they were to us as children. She left us living in a car. She left us eating nothing. I mean, we didn't expect to have food. That was never something that I took for granted. And I never expected her to be a parent. That's the odd thing to me a little bit. Because I never had it, I never even assumed that she would be that. That wasn't even a possibility. We just survived. We just lingered and we survived off of whatever was around us. I think I think she was definitely one of the worst parents I've ever really heard about.
Yeah, certainly.
She was just so criminally neglectful, but she was also so mentally ill, and to have 5 children, I don't know.
And you were taken from her. So tell the listeners a little bit too. Like, one of the great things about that passage you read is how the system kind of failed, in that they returned you to her care, someone who repeatedly proved that they couldn't take care of a child, and you were returned to her care again and again. So tell the readers a little bit about that experience. It's one of my favorite passages in the book, when you are first kind of taken.
So I'm first taken from my mom. So we're living on the beach. We're living in the back of a car. I'm still with my siblings. It's still for most people, it's desolate, but it's precious because I'm still with my siblings. So we go to live in a motel, and I'm helping my mom by helping her. I felt like I was staging with her. I had a job with her. And then my mother was psychotic and hit somebody, did drugs. She was just always doing drugs. So we were taken from her and put into different foster homes. And that's when all of us were separated. All of us. I never really saw my siblings again. I mean,
and let's linger there. What did that feel like? And when you reflect on that time, how did the system of being taken away from your mom, but then also ripped away from your siblings, separated from everything, like, how do you feel about that experience now? How did you feel about it then?
It was inhuman.
Yeah.
It was inhuman what we went to. I was taken to the dependent unit, like a prison for children, separated from my siblings. It's the most inhuman trauma that I could have experienced. And when I look at my childhood, that was the trauma. The system created the trauma that destroyed my family and my siblings, to be honest with you. Not that we wouldn't have been harmed by what my mom was doing, but to separate all of your siblings and never see them again, that's what happened to me. I mean, even though I've written a book and I feel very successful in my life, I feel very thankful, I lost everything. I don't have siblings, I don't get to have them. And I feel like the system is really broken for kids. There's foster kids who are lingering in hotel rooms. I mean, foster kids are more traumatized or as traumatized as war vets. They have the same amount of trauma.
Wow.
So this system is, I have a lot of ideas on how I'd like to see it repaired and restored. I really believe in families being together. And I wish that my mother would have gotten the care that she needed, the mental health care. My mother was just thrown into jails my whole life. Straitjackets. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody in a straitjacket, but they brought straitjackets to our house to wrap her up in, throw her. The amount of trauma she went through, and she was so mentally ill that she just wasn't getting what she needs either. So she was a victim as well to our mental
Yeah.
health system. And I really believe that.
I want to hear a little bit about, kind of your ideas. I love the fact that you can look back on your life and say that you really wish that you had stayed together as a family. And what I'm hearing from that is that you wish you could have stayed with your mom in whatever state she was in, and that the actions that were taken were to support and help your mom care for you and your siblings, as opposed to, ripping you away and putting you in a different location. Is that what am I hearing correctly?
I agree with you on that. I believe that we should have a structure of counseling and help instead of just throwing people in prison and in jails. And psych wards are literally hell. I mean, hell on earth. If you've ever been to one, or if you know anybody, this is not a place of healing. So all these things, yes, I do feel like we could have stayed with my mom. I do feel like they could have gotten us counseling. They could have supported us. They could have seen, the deficiencies and make sure that we were in school and that there was some sort of system there to help. Because, and I'm not saying my mother was criminally neglectful. She was mentally ill. So there's no perfect answer here, but I don't believe in tearing families apart, if at all possible.
I think that's right. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And especially, one of the reasons why I believe that is because by the end of the book, despite everything that you go through, that the reader is sort of, I won't say we're led to believe that it's because of your mom, but we certainly can see the writing on the wall. Your mom is a difficult character, and she, like you said, she's a very selfish character, and we're rooting for you, Stephanie, throughout. So we can't see why she would abandon you in the way that she has. But by the end of the book, or really, I guess the start of the book, the reader sees that Stephanie is basically caring for her aging mother, who now, who then is diagnosed with an illness. And that is I keep reading in the comments on Amazon and on Instagram, that is something that people just are amazed that you were able to do. And I think it's the reality that even some of us who haven't gone through the kind of traumas that we've gone through with our own parents, it's a huge undertaking in and of itself. So tell me about, what place you were at with your mom when she was diagnosed, and then when you subsequently decided to start interviewing her to figure out about your past.
My mother, when I started the interview process, my mother was in her persona flow. She was very, very dangerous. I hadn't taken guardianship of her. The police were at her house. I mean, some of the things that I did are just nuts. You read about me going into an interview with my mom at a psych ward. That's not that's not the smartest thing to do.
Yeah.
But I didn't know she was going to live from day to day. Every day was so I needed to find out from what was going on with what happened to my family, what happened to my childhood, what happened to this family. So I went to the psych wards. So she was still very, very sick. The county actually asked me to take guardianship of her, and I was terrified. You're talking about taking guardianship of a sociopath who's been in and out of prison, jail, psych wards your entire life, and you're going to take guardianship of her? It was insane, but I did it, and I'm so glad I did. It was the best decision that I ever made, because from then on out, I got her mental health care. I put her in a home that was beautiful. I decorated her room. I gave her a life. And she flourished. I mean, I'm so emotional. You're making me cry.
No, it's great. It's great.
I took care of her, but it was where I always wanted to be. We had a relationship in the end, because I do believe she got mental health medications that she needed. I could say she needs to eat a proper diet. She couldn't do drugs. I wouldn't let her smoke cigarettes. I took all of her habits away And I said, you're going to just deal with your pain here with me. We're going to do this. We're going to deal with the rape. We're going to process our pain together. And I kept doing this for 2 years. My mom outlived every medical book. She was given 6 months. 2 years later, I'm still interviewing her because it worked. And we were finding so much love. The interviews just became a way of communicating, and it became a way for us to really find each other and love each other. And my mom had a lot against me. You know, you have to understand, she wasn't proud of me. She wasn't like you would be proud of your daughter. She saw me as somebody who was better than her, because that's how she saw the world after she was raped. So she had to come to terms and really get to know me. She also got to know me and who I was. And we found love. Like, we truly found love. I mean, I drive down the road and I think about those moments we had together, and those were the life-changing moments that I longed for. A mother and daughter is a powerful relationship that I don't feel can be broken. I really don't. I feel like you have to repair that for your own psyche. You know, somehow you have to find peace with that. And I did. And I found love. I found a relationship with my mother that was beautiful, and it's in my heart forever. It just has made me a whole person.
Yes. Beautiful. That's so well put, Stephanie. That's the feeling that the reader has by the end of the book, is that journey you go on with your mom from the moment of her diagnosis while you're interviewing her for those 2 years. It is a journey of rediscovery of a relationship, and of kind of the power of love. It sounds cliche, but two people willing to see each other in a new way, deciding that they're going to see each other in a new way. And it's beautiful. But, you know, the beginning of that is actually slightly selfish. I won't say selfish, but it's the motive that you have in interviewing her is desperation, right? You don't know anything about your dad or your father's side. You have guesses, and you've your mom has made some very cruel statements to you early on about who your dad might be, but you really don't know anything. So those initial interviews talk about like going in, what your motives were, what you were trying to understand from your mom, and like the headspace you were in.
I didn't know who my grandparents were. I didn't have a name, Sydney. I changed my name while writing this book because I found a name. I was a nameless person. I don't even think you can relate to what it's like to not have any history, to not know where you come from, and have the most traumatic childhood that you can't even tell people because you don't even know where to start. It doesn't fit with who you are. So I had no name, I had nothing, and I was ready to find these answers. And I was desperate because she was going to die, and I needed to share. I needed to, in the beginning, I mattered. I found peace in my life before I went to have interviews with my mom, that I mattered. I never mattered. I never mattered to myself. I never mattered to anybody, but now I matter. And you're going to talk to me. You're not going to hide behind your violence, your drugs, your anger. I had to stand up to this persona flow. I mean, this sounds so hard to even talk about because it's so abnormal, but my mother had this personality that was so dangerous. And I just kind of took the wind out of this sociopathic personality and kind of confronted it, you know, which it's terrifying. It was a terrifying, this person, Flo, came after me to kill me, and my life seriously was in court, you know, threatening to find a gun to kill me. That's my mother. Can you even fathom? Your mother's supposed to love you, but my mother was plotting this. So instead of being angry, as most people I think would want me to be or would be, I wasn't. I really wasn't. Like, at this point, I need to know why, and I need you to listen to me, because I need you to listen to my pain now of what you did. So there was that. And it really came from this inner strength that I what I had become in my life when I started
Mm.
this. I had become more whole, and I was ready to face all of this head on.
Wow. Amazing. I want to shout out. I mean, we've been talking for 25 minutes. I feel like I've like been so in it stuff. And if anyone has questions that they want to ask, I should mention you can hit the ask a question, or you can ask it in the chat. I'll be looking for those. So go ahead and let me know. I want to switch gears from talking about your mom to talk about the person in the book who you know is my favorite character, and I think serves as, throughout the book, the opposite of your mom in a lot of ways. This is a person who was, where your mom was absent, cruel.
Mm-hmm.
He was loyal, consistent,
Mm-hmm.
and that's Jim, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to hear from you the decision to include Jim. You know, you could have written a whole book about just your childhood
Mm-hmm.
and your mom. What was the impetus for, okay, I'm going to include the character of Jim, who is your
Mm-hmm.
husband, and that you're not only going to include him, you're going to flesh out that relationship. You're going to go back, you're going to say when you met, you're going to go through your marriage, your and struggles in your marriage.
Yeah.
You're really going to confront that on the page. So you're confronting, you know, your past with your mom, but also your present with your best friend and husband, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Like, talk to me about that decision making at the desk as a writer.
Well, who saved my life? Jim. You know, and to say and to not include him when I was 15 years old. When I met him, he was the first person I shared all of this with, and I don't even know how he could handle it at 16. It was very traumatic for him, but he was the first person that I felt safety with. And I was like, I'm safe. I'm home. He's the first person who ever said that he loved me, the first person I ever felt love from, and the first person I ever heard those words from. So, of course, he is such a big part of my life, and I really feel like he saved my life. That being said, I also married my high school sweetheart. I never got to experience dating and normalcy and the things that I felt that people got to have. And so I wanted that. And then through this journey of really mattering and finding myself, I wanted to go and have a relationship with a different man, you know? And so I write about all this, and I have this client that comes in, um and I also felt how it would be really inauthentic to not share my struggles. You cannot have a childhood and an experience come from where I came from and be perfect.
Oh,
Yes. And I never felt that's just not who I am. And so I wanted to share that. But I also wanted to share the fact that, again, Jim loved me again.
right.
He decided that she wants to be dated. I'll date her. She wants that relationship with another man. I'll be that other man. And then
Yeah.
you can read about the things that we did to to change our marriage, to really change our marriage, because I married so young, and most of the time that ends in failure, but we didn't let that happen. We let the fact that we really love each other. I feel like there is no universe without us together.
Mm.
It just is no way.
That was making me, you talking about Jim makes me, that's when I get a little weepy. It's so beautiful. And it is the thing, Jim and your relationship in the book is the thing that it has to be a silver lining. How could,
Mhm.
when I read your stories of growing up, it is so painful for everyone. I think readers across the board have said this is a challenging,
Yeah.
your past is challenging, but your
Mhm.
relationship with Jim and I shouldn't say relationship is like the goal on the other side. It's, or the, you know, best possible thing. It's woman that you become,
Mm-hmm.
this woman who can kind of confront her husband with what she needs. And at the opening scene of the book is you interviewing candidates for your school where you're a CEO. And there's so much satisfaction and power that you hold
Mm-hmm.
by the end of the book. I just wanted to say,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel that now in your life?
I feel fully empowered. I feel like I had a lot of I would say strength and gifts that I think I was given from my heritage that I didn't know
Mm,
about. But I
mm,
come from this line of educators and creators of education, and all the things that I am, my family was. And so I have to believe that that line and that bloodline stayed in me because I had these innate qualities. But I was not a whole person. I was not a whole person until I wrote this book. And
mm,
until I came clean with my story, until I repaired the relationship with my mother, and then also I repaired my relationship with my husband. I had to choose, did I just marry him because I had nowhere else to go and because I was a desperate person, foster kid? No, I married him because I love him and I got to choose him.
yep.
And he gave me the opportunity to choose him instead of forcing me the fact that I'm married. And that's how you end up in divorce. I just really think that, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for divorce, but we could have ended up in divorce. But he let me choose him all over again. And I just think,
Mm,
how wonderful is that in a relationship,
beautiful.
that he was able to give me that. And he is spectacular.
He really is.
He really is.
So, Rose has a question. Are you
Yeah.
ready? Get a
Yeah.
question from the audience. At what point in your life did you gain your self-worth and self-confidence
Mm.
after growing up with so much trauma?
Yeah, that's such a really great question. And I'm going to be really honest. I have a really great therapist that I met 10 years ago, actually, and we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary. Nobody
Gotta
celebrates
celebrate
that with
that.
their therapist. Um, I have done the work in my life.
Mm,
This is not easy. It is not easy to confront being 8 years old and having a foster dad harm me in the way that he did. All the things that I went through, the trauma of being so uneducated and having to make up for that loss in my life, and all of those things, um, I had to face. Instead of turning to alcohol or drugs or whatever, I definitely did turn some of my passions like design into my drug, into being so perfect on the outside that if you looked at me, there was so many layers of, oh, she's successful, she's this, she's that, whatever. I wasn't, those were just layers of protection.
mm,
So I had to really dive into those layers and stop having this facade, stop trying to be something that I wasn't in order to be the person that I am today, which is showing up as a whole person, Stephanie, a broken past, you know, issues, whatever they might be. It's just me. It's just okay. I feel so whole. I really do. I think the hardest part for me, honestly, and the part that makes me still sad is that I don't have my siblings, that they didn't get out of this, and that there's so many of them are mentally ill, and all of the things that happened, and that still breaks my heart because that's just not having that family has been really hard.
mm. Thank you, Rose. Thank you for your question. Stephanie, you mentioned in your answer, you talked about making up for a lack of education and being kind of uneducated. And you and I have been talking about this in a few ways, but I was hoping you would tell readers the story of who taught you to read and about reading and about
Yeah.
some of the themes we've talked about education and where you were
Yeah.
in fifth grade, the kind of
Hmm.
yeah, the gap between you and the other students.
Well, I have to say, when I was raising my kids and when they were in school is when the trauma came back to me. So volunteering in the school, my kids didn't know this. I would be physically sick by the time I would volunteer in their classroom because of the trauma of the smell of school. I would
Oh,
have to go home and go to my room and and they didn't know how much I was suffering. School was so traumatic for me. I was mute. I mean, I literally remember being mute, not being able to speak out of fear. I couldn't read. I didn't look like anybody else. I was blind in one eye. I couldn't see. I mean, I was just a nothing. I can't even explain. It was just a nothing. And because I never complained, I believe that's why nobody got involved. I was such a good kid, so compliant. I was trying, I was doing what I could to try, but I was so far behind. And one of my mother's boyfriends, his name is Daniel in the book. He taught me to read. So we had moved to Oregon, and I was approaching 11, I believe. I couldn't write my name. I couldn't um I couldn't read. I couldn't make out words. So he taught me by using the book The Hobbit, which was the only book I ever saw in our house, was that Hobbit, which is not my favorite book, to be honest, at all. I'm kind of a memoir kind of girl. But I had to learn how to read with this really hard book. But he took the time every night while he was there with me. And he must have been with my mother for a year before he took off, because I got through so much. And by the time he was done, I read The Hobbit. Like, I was reading The Hobbit. I was a fast learner, but to go from zero to The Hobbit is really hard. And so he gave me that gift. And honestly, I really do believe that if you can learn to read, you can do anything. You can figure anything out. And so that was that gift that he gave me. Thank God. I don't know where I'd be to this day. And I don't think I'd be owning, my own private colleges. And I just don't know what would happen. He was my gym for that.
yeah. And it's really interesting the way that your teachers didn't notice. So, or maybe they did notice, they just didn't have kind of the time or the ability to dedicate. But yeah,
I think they were overwhelmed by me. I think, where do we start? It's like, where do we start? She's not getting what she needs at home. I was being abused in this foster home. I can't even imagine that I had the ability to even pick myself up. I'm amazed by what I went through and how children get up the next day and they just keep going. And I did that. And it was just amazing. So I don't blame the teacher. I don't blame anybody. But
Yeah.
they didn't know what to do with me.
Yeah.
I had to teach myself. And I think that's kind of where, I don't know, in some ways I got the skill to teach myself, and I started to realize how important education is. And that's why I created these schools for people. So yeah, and I have no anger about that. It was just my journey.
Yep. Okay, so home. Let's talk about home. Home is important to you, especially since your childhood was, of course, homeless, and in foster homes, or in places where you had no choice, you had no influence over your surroundings. And I find it amazing. Anyone who follows you on Instagram, anyone who knows you now, it's unfathomable that you grew up without being able to, like, you strike me as the kid with the pink walls and the like really elaborate, bedrooms. And so it's amazing to me, the place where you are now. So talk to me about home and the decision. We were talking earlier about how it's kind of in your blood to be a designer. You mentioned this in the book, but yeah, take me to that, on that journey of home and finally being able to choose the things that you surround yourself with and what it makes you feel.
Yeah, I kind of, like you being an editor, we talked about that. It was in my blood. And I think from the first time I I think it was like the fabrics in that bus because I'm obsessed with fabrics. I have a whole room now full of pillows and blankets. Like it's just packed. I mean, I just love fabric. It's in me. It's just who I am. I love creating home. I think I have this vision for foster kids where if we could stop just putting people in homes that don't matter, but like some creating home, stop calling it a group home. Let's just call it a home. I feel like I longed for home. I never had that. I was in so many homes where I just didn't matter. I mean, I wrote about Christmas. Oh gosh, Christmas when you're a foster kid, or for me, was like, oh, she's here. Oh, did you get her something? Just get something out of the closet, and then I would open up a meaningless present. I never got any gifts that meant anything to me until I met Jim, but they were just the extras. And so for me, creating Christmas and holidays, I started traditions with my children immediately. We have amazing, I have the most, Christmas is just outlandishly amazing because I suffered. I can't even, Christmas was so traumatic between not ever getting anything and then also being in a home where you don't belong. These homes, it's not home. You're not comfortable.
Right.
They don't really want you there. You're just there. And so that's why home is so important. And I'm always creating that sense of beauty and warmth. And if you walk into my house, it truly feels like you're getting a hug. My house is so warm, and everybody who comes to a party, they don't want to leave because everything is so cozy and warm and welcoming, because I never got that.
Yeah.
And I want everybody to feel that when they're in my home. And that's what home should be for everyone.
Do you feel, this is just coming to me, but do you ever think that I see a trend as an editor in memoirs where that thing that is the most traumatic, it's our greatest kind of weakness and sore spot, ultimately can become like our superpower. And it's almost like you can go 0 to 60 on taking a place and making it comfortable, cozy, welcoming, kind, and beautiful. And do you think that just incredible muscle that you have comes from that thing that we don't want to look at, that it's really painful and traumatic?
I think I used to be that way. I feel like before I did all this work in my life and before I really went deep, it was a facade. It was like beautiful. People would walk in and like, OMG. But now it's just like, oh my God, it's so real and warm and cozy and welcoming. It's real. I do think everything in my life kind of is because of what happened to me in my childhood. From wanting education, that means that everybody is part of, and we have a school where everybody matters, and it's so important to me. Like, you cannot be a bad teacher in my school. You're out. Like, everybody matters. And so that came from where my childhood came from. Home matters. Everything about my life has been dictated by this ability to have this horrendous childhood and these things. And let's make it the opposite. Let's not be that way, but let's change that. I'm kind of a big fan of intergenerational trauma being broken by one person in the family, because you can break that intergenerational trauma in your family and you can change the world.
Yeah.
You change the world for your family. That goes on and on and on. And so I really, and even in overcoming, that's what we're going to be talking about. There's people who can break that intergenerational trauma and overcome. And it's the best thing you can do for the world and for people and for your family.
Yep. It's freedom. Yep. Absolutely.
It's freedom, and it's game changing. And so I live by those values. I live by those values. And I'm just obsessed with pillows. If you follow me on Instagram, I'm always
so
reading something.
You have to tell
Every
me,
Sunday.
with fabric, are you like a touch and feel kind of
Oh
fabric
yeah.
person, or more of like a visual pattern color?
Oh,
All
designer.
of the above?
Oh, we just feel this, everything. I touch well, with COVID, it's been really hard. But yeah, I touch and feel, and I probably was always like that. And I think about the opening of my book where I saw that bus, and I looked at my sister, and I'm like, oh, and she didn't see it. I don't think she would ever remember that bus ever again. I mean, that was nothing to her. But that was like that spark. And I
Mm,
think all of us, if we follow that passion that we have in our life, if we let ourselves have that, you'll feel that in something. You know what I mean? You found that as an
yeah.
editor and a writer, and I found that as a designer. And I do think that being a designer for me did take me through. I didn't want to think about the trauma because I had this passion. But when you get healthy, it becomes integrated into your whole being, which is
Yeah.
where I live now.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Stephanie. Okay, we have another question. Was writing American Daughter a cathartic experience? Would you be a different person had you not written the book?
I think it would be tragic if I hadn't written this book for myself, for myself. It was so cathartic. I mean, I would come home from these interviews with my mother and just cry and weep and write and be angry. And I didn't let myself be angry even. I didn't let myself feel those feelings. Finding out what happened to my mother, I got to feel, I physically felt what happened to her when I started reading all those articles, and I had so much compassion for her. So I really feel like writing to pull out your emotions and to free yourself, I think is brilliant for anybody. It doesn't necessarily have to be a book, because that is really challenging to write a book. It's a big endeavor, but you could write a blog. You can just share it on social media. And so, yes, cathartic. I recommend it for everyone.
Would you, yeah, so I guess you answered the second part too. Would you be a different person had you not written the book? Sounds like absolutely.
Oh man, I wouldn't have met you, Sydney.
That would also
Here.
be tragic.
Um, Oh, if I wouldn't have done the work with my mom in my life and she died, I wouldn't have a past. I wouldn't have a name. I would
Yeah.
be broken. I believe I would still be a broken person, a half a person. I would probably still have success in my life because I was still on that trajectory, but I wouldn't be a whole person, a healthy, healed person. So, yeah, I'm so thankful.
We have another question.
Yeah.
Your story, this is from Lisa. Your story is amazing and uplifting. Has Hollywood come calling to buy the screenplay?
Hollywood is calling. We're working with Hollywood. Um, yeah, I mean, they're talking about, and I think this makes sense for the book about having it be like a mini series, because there's so many layers to the story. From, there's my story, there's Jim's story, there's what happened to my mother, there's the history of our country that is part of the story. There's the breakdown of the family that even happened before my mother, between my grandmother burning, or basically burning all of our precious antiques, and everything from our history of the country was in my grandma's hands, and she sold everything at a garage sale.
That's one of my favorite parts of the book. It's so unfathomable. And just
Such an
badass.
antique person and vintage, and there was a Botticelli in there, and I was like, I would have had all that in my house. I could have kept it sacred. So there's just a lot of layers and stories, and so much to learn in American Daughter. And there's so much about, and I didn't mean to do this when writing the book, but everybody connects to it in their own way.
Yeah.
Everybody's story, for whatever reason, connects to American Daughter. It's an American story. It's so diverse, and so many people can relate. And even though I didn't think that would be the case, I have found that it is the case for people, that they get to be part of this story and book and this American story.
Mm, yeah. Um, yeah. So I have a couple more questions
Yeah.
for you, Steph. One of them is, I can't get out of this any interview with you without plugging the audiobook for
Oh,
American Daughter. So
beautiful.
yes, gorgeous, incredible, best
Yeah.
audiobook hands down I've ever worked on, hands down,
Hmm.
no question. It's so
Hmm.
evocative of, it adds a whole new dimension. I highly
Hmm.
encourage, if you're listening right now and you have bought the physical book American Daughter, to
Hmm.
do yourself a favor and also buy the audiobook. It adds a
Hmm.
whole new layer um, of meaning and experience to the pages. But Stephanie, talk about Mojan and
Hmm.
some of the things that when we were going into the audiobook
Hmm.
that we had to consider and that we had to get right.
Oh, first off, it's brilliant. I mean, everybody I've talked to, and I would be the first person to be uncomfortable with an audiobook, to be honest. I would be, oh, don't make me sound like that. And she nailed it. There are times when I feel like I'm in the room with my mom again when I'm listening to it. And I've had people say they've listened to it 3, 4 times. Like you cannot get this audiobook is so beautiful. And it also, I felt like, you so much of the editing that you did made the book kind of seamless throughout. So when you hear that audiobook, it just really does feel so beautifully written, so well done. It's just so powerful. You can't put the audiobook down. Now, I suggest you listen to it on the weekend because you can't go to work. I've had people say I am late for work. You cannot turn this
Yeah,
thing off. It is
yeah.
Mojan did just such a beautiful job. She really nailed my mother, which that's a very complicated person because she had to go between personalities and and to be so spot on with who my mom is. And one thing I want to say is that I really, writing this book about my mom, I didn't want people to hate my mom.
Mm,
I didn't want anybody, I wanted them to feel what they feel, but to also understand and have compassion for what happened to her and how that related to mental illness, and to understand those two things, and have compassion for not just my mother but for others mentally ill people, for our homeless community, for
mm,
foster kids. you know Foster kids, 70% of them end up on the street or they end up in prison. I wanted people to see the compassion of this story, and the compassion for my mother.
mm.
I felt like Majan really did a great job
I agree.
expressing that.
I agree. We have another question.
Okay.
Do you have any advice for children experiencing a similar childhood?
Mm. Um, I just want to say that I want you to hang on to yourself. Do not dissociate, because I had times where I had the choice to dissociate and leave my mind. I had so much trauma. It's hard to even talk about. I remember continuing to keep myself present for the next day, because you can dissociate, and that's where mental illness happens. And I do believe that that helped me. So my advice is stay present with yourself. Like, you're valuable, you matter, and you have to find somebody that realizes that and listens to you. And I also think you need to find that passion in your life. What do you love? You matter. You need to find that. What do you love? And let that passion take you through to help you get out of the other side. So that's what I
Mm.
think. And I do feel like people ask me, one of my favorite questions is, what would you say to little Stephanie? And whenever I
Oh,
see
yeah.
myself, I see little Stephanie in that foster home where I was being abused. And I mean horrific, horrific, from mental, physical, everything. And I say to myself, someday you're going to matter, and someday you're going to be a badass, and that person is going to be in a book someday. Hang on to yourself, and you're going to matter. You matter. And so I have a
Yeah.
lot to say about it, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And yeah, Damn, Steph. Damn.
Oh,
Um,
these are very, very inspiring questions. I really appreciate it.
I want to talk, before we're done here, I want to talk about craft and, um, you know, there, when you're talking to your editor, of course, we're going to get into some of the decisions, the beautiful passages in the book,
Mhm.
you know, you mentioned early on in our discussions that at one point you uh, drove back to
Mhm.
the location where you lived in your car um,
Mhm.
when you were a child, and you experienced that place again, and you can tell when you read the book that despite all the trauma, the detail, the beautiful pacing, the incredible like truth of detail, it's so hard. As an editor, I
Mhm.
know how hard it is. It's so difficult
Mhm.
for people, even
Mhm.
those who haven't gone through what you've gone through. So talk about the actual act of reliving some of these events through writing, the painful and the not so painful.
I do want to say that it has taken a village to write American Daughter. From me to Alyssa to you to some other editors who edited even before you. I have had
Mm-hmm.
a team of people who have helped put this book together. And I really believe that. And I believe for me, having a community, it's the same as education. For me, community and letting people have their skills. Let the editor have her skills. Let this person have their skills. And I can still be relevant and be the person who brought American Daughter to life, who wrote this book, who did the work. Um, and so, and I want to say I'm so thankful for the community and everybody who had a hand in this. And I thank everybody for that. I did go back and I relived again, which I think this is really important to do for me. I went back to the place where I lived on the beach. I went back to the foster home and I confronted the people who lived there again. I walked up to that house where I was abused. I took my power back. Those things that terrified me and those things that I lived in my nightmares, I took all of it back while writing American Daughter. And I physically went there and took my power back. Like I'm a giant person now with a personality and an inner strength. And I took it all back. And I recommend that for people. Take that power back. Don't let anybody have that. So I did
Did
that.
you confront the man who abused
Well,
you?
his son was there in the
Mm.
house, and I confronted his son. And his son knew and wanted me to leave because he knew. I said, I used to live here. I was one of the foster children here, and I was not
Mm.
a happy camper. I'll tell you that when I grew up. I was shaking. And the interesting thing to be for me is that this home where I was held felt so big. But when I went back, it looked broken and burned. It was like visiting this empty shell of a darkness that they were still living in, and I wasn't living in that anymore.
Right.
I'm living this really great life. So that was really peaceful for me. And just that was all I need. All I needed to do was to confront that, and then I could just move on. I didn't need to stay there in anger. I moved on, and it was so powerful and so great for me to write in the book because
Yeah.
hardest part was for me to write what happened to me in its chapter 10, and it's horrendous and I hated writing it, but it needed to be there. It needed to be the truth.
Yep.
And but it doesn't hold any power in my life.
Woo. Yeah, that's great. I love what you were saying about how you remember it as a kid and how it truly is now that you see it as an adult. That's such an important thing, a gift
Mhm.
to give yourself if you have
Mhm.
a trauma or something that you're afraid of. I've
Yeah.
found that to be true in my own life as well. Revisiting a place, you can sometimes it's something in your mind that it ends up not being, and that is a great way to take your power back. Um, yeah, before we have to close, I want to ask if anyone else has questions for Stephanie.
That went so fast.
I know. I know. I could go
Fire.
another hour with you. I feel like we're just getting into it. And remind people, the good people of Barbara's bookstore, to please buy the book. You can click this little link down here, or maybe it's this way. I'm not sure. And yeah, get your copy of American Daughter. Steph, anything else you want to say?
I just want to, my legacy to give American Daughter out there to everybody, and just to help just people to know that they are empowered to overcome in their own life. And that's what I want for everyone.
Yay! Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the bookstore. And it was wonderful to talk to you as always.
Oh, it was brilliant. Yeah, I love you so much. We will talk soon. Thank you so much, Barbara's Bookstore.
Thank you.